They told him to forget what he'd heard. April 12, 1983, 1:37 a.m. Edward Keller sat alone in the monitoring room of Station Delta, a half-forgotten lunar intercept site buried in the New Mexico desert. Once critical to the Apollo program, the array had long since fallen out of official rotation. NASA had moved on, the military too. What remained was a skeleton staff and the hum of outdated machines that hadn't mattered in years. Keller, 29 years old and barely holding on to his clearance, was working night shift, cataloging old telemetry tapes. Most of the time, it was dead air. But that night, the signal came through. It began faintly, a low-band VLF pulse, cycling at irregular intervals. At first, he assumed it was atmospheric interference, or maybe old telemetry bouncing off ionospheric layers. But the cadence was deliberate, and more importantly, it was coming from the moon. Keller paused. That couldn't be right. There were no active missions, no satellites, and nothing on the logs scheduled for transmission from lunar orbit. He adjusted the dials, isolated the signal, and hit record. Then it changed. The pulse broke apart, fragmented into static, then into something else. Distorted voice data, buried beneath layers of hiss. A male voice, mechanical and low, struggling against decades of radio decay. Keller leaned in. Primary signal, confirmed, subject locked. Then, clearer, unmistakably human. This is control. Signal received. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Keller froze. It wasn't just the voice. It was the tone. Calm, exact, and terrifyingly familiar. He rewound the tape, played it again, and realized what made his skin crawl. The voice was his own. Not distorted, not similar. His voice. Same inflection, same breath patterns, saying words he hadn't spoken, at least, not yet. And then came the date. Clearly, at the end of the message, August 3rd, 2023, 1942, UTC. A date 40 years in the future. Keller sat back, heart pounding. Something was wrong, very wrong. Within 2 hours, the base had been swarmed. Not by NASA, but by military personnel from an agency he didn't recognize. They confiscated the reel, wiped the secondary backups, and ordered him to sign a non-disclosure. The official story? Atmospheric bounce from a Soviet test signal. He was lucky, they said. Most civilians never get close to a real anomaly. But Keller had made a third copy. Hidden, analog, unlabeled. And over the years he played it back again and again, listening to his own voice from a future that hadn't arrived. Waiting for answers. Watching the calendars slowly approach the date he once heard, whispered across lunar static. August 3rd, 2023. The night the moon would reply again. By the time August 2023 rolled around, Edward Keller was gone. Died of cancer 2 years earlier, but his tapes lived on. Unmarked and half-decayed, they ended up in the hands of a systems archivist named Dr. Mariah Chen, who'd once written her thesis on Cold War signal anomalies. She worked for Lunavox, a private aerospace contractor tasked with mapping Shackleton Crater for a future moon base. It was meant to be a routine orbital survey, but on August 3, 2023, at 1942 UTC, just as Keller's tape had predicted, their mapping probe encountered a frequency anomaly. Low-band VLF, 12.89 Hertz. The engineers flagged it immediately, not because it interfered with the telemetry, but because of its signature. Embedded in the spectrogram was a unique modulation pattern, one that matched a spectrogram Dr. Chen had stored on her private drive. Keller's tape. the one where he'd heard his own voice calling from the future. Now it was happening again, only this time it was Mariah's. A signal burst from the lunar far side, stronger, clearer. Dr. Chen routed the feed to a secondary decryptor. What unfolded made her stomach turn cold. It wasn't just voice. It was a compressed AV stream, data designed to reconstruct a short video feed. It took hours to fully render. Artifacts, black and white grain. But what emerged on the screen was unmistakable. A control room, fluorescent lights, CRT monitors, people at desks. 4 individuals. One of them, center frame, was her. Same face, same necklace, same jacket she'd worn just last week. And behind her, on a flickering monitor, a waveform unspooled, constant, rhythmic. This is control. Signal lock confirmed. Primary event imminent. Do not respond. Repeat. Do not respond. She stared in horror. She hadn't recorded this. It was dated August 3rd, 2023, 1942 UTC, the very moment they'd received the new lunar signal. In the footage, she and the others didn't speak. They only watched. And in the top right corner of the screen was something else. A countdown. Red digits. 003, 002. Then the screen cut to black. Dr. Chen tried to contact the transmission systems team, but they were already offline. A total communications blackout had swept through the probe feed. No one could explain why. Radiation levels were nominal. No hardware failure. Yet every system tied to the lunar array went dead. When power returned 6 minutes later, the video was gone. But a final log file had been left behind. Just 6 words. Delta confirmed. Recursion event is live. And at the bottom, a waveform signature. It wasn't from the moon this time. It was coming from inside the Lunavox server cluster. Whatever had started in 1983, the message Keller heard, the warning he recorded, it wasn't a one-time event. It was a cycle. And now, it had begun again. Lunavox shut down the lunar receiver array within 24 hours. The official memo cited a calibration fault due to cosmic ray exposure. But behind closed doors, a task force was assembled. Internal intelligence, quantum signal analysts, and 2 former NSA consultants. One of them had worked Delphi back in 1983. He refused to speak for the first 2 meetings. Then finally, he said this. The transmission wasn't from the moon. Not really. The moon was just the reflector. He described a theory Keller had scribbled in the margins of his last notebook. It had never been published, never submitted. Just a personal hypothesis. The moon isn't silent. It's a passive relay, part of a feedback system built into space-time itself. Delphi, he believed, was an experiment not in signal reception, but in causality detection, an attempt to trace echoes from moments that hadn't happened yet, quantum shadows bouncing off the moon's surface like sonar. Keller had called it time-reflected entropy, a kind of cosmic recursion, and he'd warned that if the signal was ever answered, even inadvertently, it would complete a loop. Back in 2023, Dr. Chen realized something chilling. The video she'd received from the Anomaly, showing her future self, wasn't a warning. It was a recording, one she'd now be obligated to recreate, step by step, just by knowing it existed. The loop had already begun to enforce itself. That week, she noticed strange glitches in her office. CRT screens powering on without signal input. An old unopened envelope from Lunavox's archival department appeared on her desk, stamped August 12, 1983. Inside was a printed image of her own face from the transmission, drawn in dot matrix. There was no way That photo should exist. One night, while going over signal logs, Dr. Chen fell asleep at her desk. She awoke to a humming sound. Low, bassy, like an old transformer coil, vibrating beneath the floor. Her monitor had gone black. Then text appeared, line by line. Response loop confirmed. Delphi Phase 2, imminent. Location, primary listener node. Subject, Chen, M. Experience index, 4 out of 4, cohort online. Event stability, 92%. She turned to grab her phone, but her office door slammed shut. From her screen came a sound. Not a voice, not even mechanical. It was her own breath. Then the voice from the 1983 tape, Edward Keller, distorted but calm. Mariah, we tried to warn you. The lights in the building surged, then everything went still. That was 5 days ago. Lunavox went dark the next morning. Their website offline. All assets under audit. Dr. Chen's name was quietly removed from publications. No record of the signal remains in public archives, but in a private storage node, air-gapped and offline, one final log remains. An audio file, 32 seconds long. It's mostly static, until the final moment. Then a voice whispers, Delphi complete, awaiting next cohort. And if you slow the waveform, you'll hear a faint echo, your own voice, saying something you haven't said yet. What you heard tonight, it's just one of many. Subscribe to Hauntica for stories that shouldn't exist.